Hello, friends. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most psychologically charged conjunctions. And yes, I'm talking about Sun and Rahu conjunct. And we have this conjunction coming up in the sign of Pisces, which will perfect on February 26th, right before the eclipse, which is on March 3rd. And I want to start here. This combination can produce extraordinary drive, as well as visibility, ambition, magnetism, and force of one's will. And one of the reasons that this combination carries so much intensity is because the symbols themselves are at conflict on so many levels. For instance, the sun represents that which is the center, and Rahu is the force that wants to seize that center. And when these guys come together, the question becomes about when hunger meets the radiance of the sun. Because North Node Rahu is the head of the dragon. It wants to consume everything. But before getting into the depth of this video, there'll be plenty of videos coming out about the transit, as well as other topics that I'm making, such as Saturn return in the sign of Aries, and the next video being about Venus's exaltation at 27 degrees, which is loaded with symbolic meaning. I'm going to unpack that, so if you guys want to watch those videos, please remember to subscribe, and apparently you have to turn on the notification bell so you're notified. So let's get into the depth of this video. And before moving on, just to give you guys a layout of the video, I'm going to talk about the volatility of this conjunction first. I'm going to get into its mythologies because it's so friggin' interesting as to what Rahu North Node is. Why does it do what it does? And then I'm going to get into the psychological factors of how this shows up in a natal chart. So now let's get right into this. And I want to start here. I want to name the core symbolic tension directly. So wherever the sun is sitting in your chart, it's symbolizing the organizing center of the self. That's where we get selfhood. For instance, the sun symbolizes the soul, the essence of you, consciousness, which is your power to perceive and to experience, as well as your ego, your self-concept, your identity, your sense of self-esteem, authority, visibility. Sun also represents governance, reliability, and decisiveness. So the sun is that radiating center that gives coherence to life. It's able to sustain the life that orbits around it, just like the sun in our solar system, by being that stable center where all the other planets can rely upon it. And specifically on Earth, we need that heat to also survive. So the sun is life generating and life preserving. Now let's take Rahu on the other hand, just by itself. It's a force of amplification, magnification. It's about distortion of things beyond how they actually are. So it's a destabilizing force. They create, both of the nodes create a lot of chaos. For instance, Rahu magnifies our appetite. It stretches the field that we stand in, the structure that we stand in, beyond its current capacity. Like if you're here and the furthest you can see is the horizon, Rahu is what's beyond the horizon. So it intensifies desires and it pushes consciousness even beyond its limits. It's always pushing us towards what feels unfinished, unfamiliar. Like Rahu is related to things that are exotic, foreign, eccentric. There's something in that force field of Rahu that creates compulsion. It makes things feel very compelling, but it creates movement through disturbance. So every time we move towards that thing, we're surpassing some limit and boundary that maintains the integrity of our life. So it creates disturbances and chaos. So when Rahu comes and joins the sun, Rahu is entering the very place where identity is organized and where our personal authority is built. And just remember, I said Rahu destabilizes and creates disorder and chaos. So when these two meet, it really matters because the sun needs a sense of coherence and order, predictability to radiate as a centralized point. Like the sun is so reliable, it's always rising at the same place on that day of the year. There are no inconsistencies. We can rely on the sun. Our entire body, like the circadian rhythm, is just all wired around the sun and its stability. But that urgency and that appetite that comes from Rahu, it destabilizes that reliability that is supposed to come from the sun. Like this conjunction is such a compelling conjunction. The natives who have this are very interesting people. And at the same time, when you get to know their narratives, they're treading some very difficult waters. Like the person has this hunger for solar outcomes. such as recognition, feeling important. They want influence, legitimacy, legacy, visibility, authority. They want their existence, their being, their self to have an impact on the world. So on one hand, it can create the capacity for achievements because they have the appetite. They're deeply driven to become somebody or something in the world. But at the same time, it can create enormous amount of strain, especially if the hunger grows faster than the inner foundation of the self. And I want to take you guys back to the mythologies related to Rahu, just so that we understand this concept that's related to this conjunction, which has to do with power and visibility. The story actually holds the logic of this combination, and it's such a profound story, and I encourage you to check it out because we won't have the time for me to go through the entire thing. But we're going to start here. So in the Vedic mythologies, before there was Rahu and Ketu, there was this other being called Svarbhanu. It's through the decapitation of Svarbhanu that we get Rahu and Ketu. And this whole story starts at a moment where the Devas were losing their power. So they had to get Amrita, which is the nectar of immortality. And the way that they could get it is through somehow bringing it up from the bottom of the ocean. But they didn't have the power to do this all by themselves. So they had to align themselves with the Asuras, with the Nagas. And the Devas are like the overlords of existence, and the Asuras are like the underlords. But anyways, they team up and they convince the Asuras that come and help us get this nectar of immortality and we'll give you guys some of it. We can all be immortal. So the Asuras agree. And they use one of the Nagas, which are like dragon serpents, to start churning the ocean. So the Devas had one end of the serpent and the Asuras the other end, and they're just like churning and churning until the Amrita, the nectar of immortality, popped up. So now the Devas and the Asuras are all sitting around. But what the Asuras didn't realize is that the Devas were never going to give them the nectar of immortality. And to kind of distract them, Vishnu, one of the Trimurtis, transforms himself into a beautiful woman called Mohini, just completely seducing these Asuras. And the Asuras are just all about seduction and pleasure. So they were completely falling for it, except one guy, Svarbhanu. Svarbhanu was like, these guys are tricking us. They're not going to give us the Amrita. I'm going to get what's rightfully mine, because that was the agreement. So he disguises himself as a Deva, and he goes and sits right between Chandra and Surya. Chandra is the moon, and Surya is the sun. And the Devas are getting the round of having a sip of the Amrita. And when it came to Svarbhanu, so he has the cup, the sun and moon notice that, hey, this guy is not a Deva. He's an Asura. So right away, they go and tell Vishnu. And as soon as Svarbhanu takes the cup and just about to have that sip, Vishnu beheads Svarbhanu. So now the head of the serpents, the Naga, the Asura, Svarbhanu, becomes Rahu and his tail becomes Ketu. And Vishnu throws the head on one end of the cosmos and the body on the other end of the cosmos. Hence, now we got the nodes, Rahu and Ketu. So now I want you to think about the layers of symbolic intelligence in this story. First of all, it's showing us Rahu's relationship to power. It was already there before the decapitation. He wanted access to immortality, what was rightfully promised to him. He wanted to enter the ultimate field of power, which is the field of gods and the Devas. But then again, pay attention, even though he should have rightfully gotten the nectar, he didn't enter that field in a straightforward, obvious way. He entered through a disguise. It's always saying something about our ability to position ourselves and to use strategy. Rahu is very smart. And we know from the story of the Asuras, they can shapeshift. So Rahu is indicating the power of mimicry as well as infiltration. Rahu will appropriate anything in order to access what he wants, which is always beyond the horizon. Look how far he was thrown out into the cosmos. What he can see, no other planet can see. And the third point that's essential for our topic right now, we got to remember the two guys that ratted him out were the sun and the moon, because they became the witnesses to what was happening. He was sitting right in between them. And it was their recognition of him and them telling Vishnu that changed the entire fate of Svarbhanu. So in the mythic memory, the luminaries are tied to exposure, and recognition. And think about it, after all, both of them represent light. Moon is the light of the night, sun is the light of the day. They expose things through their light. So in some way, they were just performing their own nature, but they interrupted Rahu in getting the power that he wanted. And there's almost, if you think about it, if you put yourself in the place of Svarbhanu and being as intelligent as he was, it kind of makes you feel humiliated too. And think about what humiliated people who want power will do in response when they are humiliated. And this gives us the symbolic depth to the eclipse imagery. Rahu and Ketu, their only objective is to swallow the luminaries. And Rahu loves to swallow the sun as the luminary and Ketu the moon. And this image isn't random. It's carrying the narrative of appetite, especially when it comes to Rahu North Node. It brings up to mind imagery of resentment, retaliation, and unfinished conflict. And you know what? Rahu and Ketu, both of them, represent the leaders of armies that are outcasts. Like you can think of Rahu like guerrilla warfare, and Ketu would be more like a sniper. They're not going to fight in the open, but they're going to disrupt. They're going to take down centers of intelligence, for example. So just to come back to our narrative here, Rahu wants to consume what revealed him. And Rahu wanted that nectar in order to have power. And from all the planets, who has the greatest amount of power? Not only because the sun, let Vishnu know, but the sun is also the greatest power holder. The sun is the sovereign center, the ultimate authority, the ultimate legitimacy, the king, and it is visible power. So when we say Rahu is eclipsing the sun, or Rahu is trying to eat the sun every time they come into some sort of a contact, Rahu wants to possess the very principle of the center of authority and power, because that's what it would give him. And this is why Rahu and Sun together carry themes of ambition, but ambition that's fused with insecurity, visibility that's fused with agitation, authority that's fused with impersonations and persona of things. And note, when we consider the story of Svarbhanu, the mythology of it, we can understand what this means in a natal chart with more precision, but at the same time with some compassion. Because everyone has a backstory, and when you meet a Sun and Rahu person, you might see such big discrepancies or things that can even feel like hypocrisy that is very easy to judge. But that backstory of the person will tell you how they arrived there. Just like the way this myth is giving us the backstory of why Rahu wants to eat the sun. So let's just now move fully from the mythology to what this combination means in a natal chart or in a transit, because the myth is giving us the blueprint. And the chart is now showing us how the blueprint is becoming our own human psychology and how it can play itself out. Sun Rahu in a chart can signify a person that can become extremely significant, influential, and powerful. Let's keep that in mind. Like within these natives, or even when we get the transit, some questions get heightened. Like, who am I? How am I seen in the world? How do I matter? Do I have an impact? Do I have authority? Am I recognized for what I truly am? Can people see my power? So they start to get this preoccupation and obsession with the self, how the self is perceived and positioned in the world. So we can get this feeling through the transit too. And think about it, when those questions comes up, because there's a sense of insignificance coming up from the subconscious. And not to jump to Pisces, but the Pisces has a lot to do with that. So with this signature, identity is not experienced as something neutral. It tends to be charged. Like there's this heightened sense of urgency inside the person, which is around self-definition, status, achievement, and authority. And I want you guys to remember this urgency can produce real strength. And that's because this combo supports bold self-invention. It can give someone intense ambition. It can give them enormous charisma. Like charisma is kind of a chameleon quality, like people who just know how to turn it on in an instant, they just become another person suddenly. It can also indicate social rise that's very unexpected or very unusual public presence. I'm going to talk about this because something just happened in the news, but we'll get to it. And that's because this native just can't wrap their mind around being ordinary. To be ordinary and unseen is something very painful. And I was saying Rahu is kind of like eccentric and out there. So they'll go to great lengths to be seen and to be known. And they have this uncanny ability to enter places of power. So if you think about it, in some way, they have the power to shape their own destiny. There's something compelling about their presence. And the reason for that is Rahu magnifies things. So Rahu's magnifying the solar quality of the person. It makes the person more noticeable, more memorable. But this becomes one of the most difficult conjunctions when the person has this insatiable hunger for recognition. And that's because the need starts to organize the self instead of the self organizing the need. And this is a key psychological issue. For instance, the sun is supposed to function as a center that's radiating outwards from its own inner core and coherence. But a person who's been hijacked by Rahu, they have this appetite around the solar fields, but they're not strengthening the core of their being. They feel that the core of their being will get strengthened if they have their needs met. So they begin to build their identity around this appetite. And what is this appetite for? It's for validation, for visibility, influence, status, power, money, being seen, being exceptional. And if you think about it, when this happens, our self-concept always becomes very unstable because it can only be fed through external stimulation. A person becomes completely reliant on constant external feedback. They don't know who they are. They need someone to tell them that they're great. You're so powerful. You're such a this and that person. Then they're like, oh, I have a sense of self. So this person will feel super powerful when they're recognized, and they just collapse when they're ignored. And there's another thing. This conjunction can create a very complex relationship with authority and authority figures. Some people with this combination will become highly ambitious, and they want to hold power. Like they want to be that authority figure. And then there are other people who become preoccupied with powerful people, with institutions, with titles, with elite spaces, what we will call, let's say, social climbers or conspiracy theorists, or people in general who are constantly knocking down every form of power. There's just this obsession with powerful people and anything related to power. And then there can be this oscillation between admiration and rivalry. And then there are those who feel very compelled to prove themselves against authority. You get a lot of rebels here. And this is because Rahu's amplifying every quality that's in the sun. Like the person can feel like I need to be larger than life. And you know what? Sometimes they are. And I'll get to that part that I was saying about the news. This conjunction can also be a significator for those who operate in the underworld, like the dark economy, drug lords, underworld organizations. And it's so funny, when we had that first eclipse, there was an arrest or someone who went to the embassy from the cartels and they turned themselves in. And I was like, is that it? Like, I thought maybe, okay, this combination's indicating something about that. But today in the news, the whole headline started with Mexico on fire. I was like, what the hell? And there was like a standoff where one of the drug lords, El Mencho, was killed. And I'm telling you, this signature is a signifier of such people with such positions. And we have the eclipses now, right? This is one of the big bosses who got killed. Now there's that chaos of the nodes, that space, that vacuum that's been created of who comes into power now. That's what Mexico on fire is about. There's retaliation back against the government because that's who apparently killed the guy. And I'm sure it has to do with internal wars of who's gonna fill this vacuum. But here's a signification of the nodes playing themselves out in real time. And today is February 23rd as I'm recording this, and this just happened. And the next eclipse is in about a week on March 3rd. Very literal. But the point is, the challenge here for people who have this combination and through this transit is to understand when we have this calling for power, which in itself is legit, but we have to understand, is it coming from some compulsive place within us? Is it because of the inflation of identity or because we want to inflate it? Or because if we position ourselves in that particular way where we gain power, we can actually do something with it, productive power. And honestly, that kind of discernment, if you have this in a chart, it takes time. It requires a lot of maturity because you could have that compulsion and you just can't explain it. So you have to go through life. You have to experience things until you understand what that is for you. And this is one of those conjunctions that matures through a lot of consequences. This is why earlier I was saying everyone has a backstory, and that's where the compassion comes into play. Because we all have the urges that we have, and we might justify them, but they might actually not be justifiable. And then we learn otherwise because life constantly retaliates against us. There are consequences. So we learn and we mature. For example, the consequence is if it's too good to be true, it probably is. If it's growing too fast, the consequences will probably be very high, like prison time. This is a person who can identify with an image strongly, and they equate its visibility and its kind of power to self-worth. Again, this requires trial and error until we get it. And this brings us to the most important part of the video, in my opinion, which is about how do we work with it. It's like, how do we need to be mindful? How does this native need to be mindful when dealing with such intense need for tremendous amount of power? So I'm going to mention 5 common complications that can come from this combination. So number 1 is related to building an identity or having a sense of self through wanting reaction from other people. And watch out for this during the transit. Because sometimes even someone fighting back with us, it shows us that we matter. For example, that we have power. But in general, Sun and Rahu combo, especially for the natives, they can become highly responsive to external mirrors. And what I mean by that is that the person starts shaping themselves according to what gets attention, how they can get access to status, visibility, what wins other people's admiration. And if you think about it logically, this over time pulls all of us away from our own center, which is our inherent power, the kind of power that nothing in this life can touch. So the work here is to repeatedly ask ourselves, what is it that's inside of me that no matter what happens externally, as attention rises and falls, it's just steady. It doesn't change. It doesn't matter what happens in life. This part of me is a constant. That question can help the self to restore that solar power that's already invested within them. Problem number 2, confusing amplification and loudness with strength. And we have to remember, Rahu always magnifies everything. So magnification can feel like power. Something just becomes larger than life because it's increasing the intensity of something. It's creating a sense of urgency because it's just right in front of us now. It can change the scale of things. I've talked about this in another video. Rahu's like taking a magnifying glass and putting it on a word in a book. Like all you see is the word. You can't read the rest of the sentences. Things actually don't make sense because it distorts everything around it and it's just magnifying that one thing. It's changing the real scaling of things where it makes things coherent. But if we think about it, sustainable solar power comes from our clarity, from our sense of consistency, responsibility, reliability, our self-knowledge. It's in our ability to hold the center under pressure. So Sun Rahu people have to learn the difference between being highly charged and being truly grounded in their own authority. That lesson will protect them and us through this transit from overextending ourselves, not to give in to image-driven decisions and unstable self-estimation that can just fluctuate based on what's happening externally. But problem number 3, performing certainty before clarity has formed. And that's because the sun represents decisiveness and clarity. And Rahu is increasing the pressure to move, to claim, and to become. So this is a person who can assert themselves prematurely, assert who I am prematurely. Like they actually take the joy out of life. Because before they achieve something, they're already fibbing and telling people that they have already achieved it. And then when they achieve it, it's actually meaningless. So they're embodying the identity and they're projecting and asking people to see them for that and to acknowledge them for that power and status before they have earned it. And that's because there's a hunger to constantly define oneself, to be somebody. And it can just become too intense. And you know, the corrective process here is to appreciate what is as is going. Like you are enough in the moment as you are. Like, you don't need to make high impact declarations or constantly make power moves. It's okay just to be a normal person once in a while. And we might experience this during this transit. So this is not just about the natives who have this placement. But problem number 4, over identifying with exceptionalism. Here, Rahu's amplifying the feeling that myself, me, I have to be special. I have to be singular. I have to be elevated. And I have to become unforgettable. And if you think about it, that kind of pressure is exhausting. I don't care how ambitious you are, it's exhausting. We have to realize a person becomes much more powerful when they learn how to root their dignity in the actual solar qualities, such as steadiness, being reliable, having consistency, truly caring for what it is that you're governing, and it's within your realm. It's in the ability and in knowing that we are life-sustaining and life-generating. That is the ultimate power in life. But all these other qualities that I've talked about that's negative, it's actually life-denying and life-destroying. The person is so self-oriented. They'll consume the whole world just to have themselves affirmed. But when we learn how to take that intensification that comes out of this, when we know how to work with it, that hunger of Rahu for power, to just take it and to have it, to this dignified capacity to be able to carry power. Because they can, because this is the theme with this placement. But let's move on to problem number 5. Complicated relationship with exposure. And in the myth, if you remember, the 2 luminaries, the sun and the moon, exposed Svarbhanu. So what this can create in our human life is to carry this deep charge, this deep need for being recognized. You will think from the story, the person doesn't want to be recognized, but no, they do. And a lot of natives with this combination seek visibility intensely, while also at the same time fearing what visibility might reveal about them. And again, going back to like a drug lord, they want to have the money, they want to have the status, they want to have the mansion, they want to have the beautiful people around them. So they want it, but they're making themselves visible. They're revealing themselves in that act, and that comes with a sense of fear. These can also be natives who feel like they have to spend a lot of time just curating their images to manage other people's perception about them. So this conjunction can also come to be about when there is maturity, a stronger relationship with truth and one's own self-presentation. And the sun is sattvic. The sun illuminates. The sun is truthful. And there can be an intensity in wanting that kind of truth. So that could be another delineation or what can come through maturity. This is to say, the more reality that can enter the solar field, the less a person has to spend their energy defending that persona, the image around who they are, and they can just be who they are. And honestly, that creates a sense of relief in life, and it creates real authority. Like, you're not fragile. Your authority is not reliant on this image and this personification of something for you to have legitimacy and authority. If people follow you, they follow you because they believe in you because of who and what you are, what you actually represent in the core of you. Now, I do want to look at the higher expression of this conjunction too, when it becomes powerful in a clean and a clear way, which is actually the way of the sun. For instance, when this combination is working, we can get a person who develops a very powerful public presence. They can enter into places that other people fear to enter. They have unusual self-confidence. The self-belief in themselves is very strong, and for the right reasons. And they can have very unusual stamina to keep working, to show up, to be present, to illuminate things, to have an impact. And they can be highly visible and influential for the right reasons. And there's another thing too. This conjunction can also show that the person can move very far from their initial condition, like who they were at their birth and what the statistics says about, let's say, this person's social mobility, economic mobility. This signature is showing that later in life, there's a far distance from that initial condition. So they can achieve great things, things that might even feel impossible. Like, this combo can become super constructive when Rahu's appetite is harnessed in service of the solar coherence. And that means the person's hunger is serving a purpose. Someone's need for visibility is actually contributing to something, like a cause. Influence comes with responsibility. So now they are known and recognized for that. So here, Rahu's magnifying Sun's qualities, but without destabilizing it. So that means the person's still carrying the intensity of this combination. They still have an unusual drive and they still want to become more. But the movement is coming from the core of them, who the self is, from the soul, from the essence. And because of that, it's stable enough to radiate clearly and without distorting other things. Because I was saying, you can put a magnifying glass on yourself. Like, let's say you're a word in a book. Yeah, you're larger than life, but you just distorted everything around you. And if you are not existing in relation and relative to other things, you don't make sense, even though you're larger than life. Like when this conjunction's working, because it's accentuating and amplifying the soul and the essence, the kind of consciousness that you are, it can actually point to something or someone noble. This is a person who knows how to metabolize ambition rather than just be possessed by it. And before closing, please do remember to like, share, and subscribe. And please comment. I can never get enough research material about the nodes. I find them so incredibly fascinating. And every time I'm doing someone's chart, I spent enormous amount of time on these two guys just to understand the process of someone's being and becoming, which tells me so much about their perception and their process. So if you can share with me, with each other, I would greatly appreciate it. This is a great way to learn. And if you guys do want a personal reading of your own birth charts, you can go to my website at parisayazdi.com or to my email in the description box below. I also upload new articles with each video, related topic, but more in depth with self-inventory questions. For that, you can also go to the website. And now to close. So Sun and Rahu conjunction is a signature of appetite. Appetite meeting identity, because we're talking about the sun. Ambition, which is always reaching outwards and forward into the future, meeting the center of our being, which is immovable, indivisible. It's about visibility meeting distortion. It can produce a lot of instability around the idea of selfhood, but it can also produce a life with enormous impact. And what determines this direction is whether if the person builds up their sun, a sun that can hold, or a Rahu that amplifies and wants to consume. And if the center, the sun within us is weak, hunger will take over this field, which we call the self. And if the center is cultivated, the hunger of Rahu becomes our fuel. And I think that is the deeper lesson of this conjunction, which is Rahu can push the self towards greater scale, greater reach, greater visibility, and greater consequences. But we have to let the sun decide what the meaning of that expansion is. How far, how deep, where to, not Rahu. Rahu cannot lead. Let the sun be the king. So if you have this conjunction in your chart, the work isn't about suppressing your ambition. Please don't do that. You've been endowed with a particular kind of power, but work to refine what it is that you want to carry, what it is that you want to take, consume. It's about learning what it means to build. It's about having clarity, augmenting that and augmenting your sense of steadiness. It's about building self-respect that's not dependent on inflation, projection, or immediate reflection of other people, so you have a confirmation about yourself. When we can do this, this conjunction can produce one of its highest possibilities, which is a person who can move towards power without losing the center of themselves, without fragmenting themselves, distorting themselves. And to conclude this video, my wish for us through this transit is this. May we build a center that is strong enough to hold what we're building. And may our ambition become a force that serves our lives rather than scatter and distort it. And that's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.